What's going on, everybody? Today I'm back with another tier list video. This time I will be ranking my 20 favorite horror movies in honor of Halloween. I am also going to post two shorter videos where I talk about the first 10 movies and then the second 10. So if you would rather watch those shorter form videos, then you should be able to find those on my channel shortly after I upload this video. In a few days, I am also going to be releasing a video similar to this where I rank all 30 spy movies I've seen. So subscribe or turn on post notifications if you want to be one of the first people to see that video. As you can see, I've changed the names of the tiers on this list, and that's because I feel like these names for the tiers are easier for you all to understand how much I enjoyed the movies. The naming for the tiers was inspired by another YouTuber by the name of Austin Burke. So if you guys enjoy videos about movies, you should definitely check out his channel. He makes a lot of fun, high quality videos. There will be only one franchise on this list, and that is because that's the only franchise which has more than one of my 20 favorite horror movies. So I'll be placing all of the movies on this list as we go, ending with that one franchise. And then at the end of the video, I will go back through and order each tier from my most to least favorite, so that at the very end of the video, you will be able to see my ranking both as tiers and as best to worst. Also, I normally would have okay, meh, bad, and the worst tiers below these ones, but I got rid of them for this video because since these are my favorite horror movies, none of them are less than good for me. A note that I would like to add before we start is that I didn't like watching horror movies until recently, so a lot of the classics I haven't had a chance to see yet, but I did watch a few in preparation for this video. So that's probably why you might not see some movies here that you expected to see. And the last thing before we get started, I will be giving some spoilers for most of the movies on this list. So I'm going to try to set up the video to have chapters so that if you haven't seen one of these movies, you can skip over my discussion of that movie and then continue watching after that if you would like to avoid those spoilers. But now getting into the rankings, first up we have Alien. Some people may consider this more of a sci-fi or space movie, but for me this movie is horror at its core, so that's why I have it here. I think that this movie gave us one of the best and most unique creature designs from any horror movie, especially back when it came out in 1979. The way that the story develops throughout the movie had me constantly wondering who was going to die next and who was going to make it out at the end. And that's ultimately one of the main things that I want out of a horror movie, so I really enjoyed this one. So we're starting off this list strong with a movie that I'm going to put all the way up in the amazing tier. Up next we have Ready or Not. I feel like this movie is a bit of a diamond in the rough. I had never heard of this until my sister showed it to me, and when she described the plot of a girl visiting her fiance's family for a customary game of hide and seek with the whole family throughout their mansion, I thought there was no way this could be good, but I was pleasantly surprised. The acting is mostly strong, and they managed to take what seems like another spin-off of a tired concept and make it intriguing and made me want to keep watching until the end. So while it's far from my favorite horror movie, I'm going to put Ready or Not firmly in the good tier. The third movie on this list is The Autopsy of Jane Doe. This is a very small scale movie, and I love that about it. Essentially, the entire movie takes place in a morgue, and as a mortician and his son examine a body and discover mysterious clues about the way that she died. And as they go further and further with the autopsy, through more and more suspicious, creepy things start happening around the morgue. And overall, I thought the mystery of this movie was laid out very well, and that mystery is part of what carries The Autopsy of Jane Doe into the great tier for me. Up next, we have Happy Death Day. This is a movie which I never really heard very much hype about, and when the sequel came out, it seemed like there wasn't a lot of hype for that movie either, but I had a lot of fun with Happy Death Day. I enjoyed the Groundhog Day theme, but obviously with a murderous twist. And the time travel element to the movie, with this repeating loop, can sometimes get confusing and it doesn't always follow its own rules, but that doesn't totally ruin the movie for me. And overall, I thought this movie was a good enough, enjoyable horror movie that wasn't trying to be one of the best movies ever, so I'm going to put it on the good tier. Now, the next movie on this list is our first of a couple A24 films that will be here, The Witch. This movie was my first introduction to Anya Taylor-Joy as an actress, and it sold me immediately. She gives an incredible performance as this farm girl in the 1600s New England, whose family is seemingly haunted by some sort of spirit or witch from the forest. This is another smaller scale type of movie that moves kind of slow and doesn't have a ton of dialogue, but those are all very intentional choices to build this eerie atmosphere that I thought worked really well. The first time I watched The Witch, it really did make me uncomfortable, but in the way I want a horror movie to make me uncomfortable, so I'm definitely going to put this in the great tier. And now we move on to another movie that really creeped me out the first time I saw it, and it still does creep me out now that I've seen it 3 times, and that movie is The Ritual. This is another one that on the surface seems like it could very easily be another copy and paste story of hikers getting lost in the forest, stumbling across a creepy house along the way, and being hunted down by a mysterious creature. But even though that setup probably sounds ripe for failure, I think this movie pulls off what it's going for brilliantly. They keep giving you small glances at the creature throughout the movie, but never show too much of it until the very end, which definitely adds to the horror of it all. 90% of horror is in the unknown, at least for me, so holding back what's really happening to these characters and what they're being hunted by makes this a hair raiser for me for sure. This is a movie that I had no real expectations for when I first watched it, but now I'm firmly going to place The Ritual in the amazing tier. Up next now we have another one of my personal favorites, Get Out. This was Jordan Peele's directorial debut, and he completely killed it. Nearly every single aspect of this movie has some element of importance or a connection to another scene, character, or plot point. It's very clear watching Get Out that a lot of effort and attention to detail was put into it from start to finish. Most of the movie falls more into the psychological horror category, which is generally my favorite type of horror, so that also helps this movie rise up this list. It also has a unique concept with these older white people switching brains with young black men so that they can have a younger, fitter body and live longer. So overall, this movie has a lot of interesting ideas and pulls off most of them extremely well. And I'm definitely going to put Get Out in the amazing tier for now, but it is a contender for that best tier when I rank all these movies at the end of the video. Piggybacking off of that, we now move on to the other Jordan Peele directed movie on this list, 2019's Us. This is the movie that really sold me on Peele as a great horror director, because while I do slightly prefer Get Out, this movie proved that that first success wasn't a fluke, and I actually prefer the concept of Us and was scared more by it. The story of there being an entire other reality that sort of exists under the surface with an evil version of everyone living on the surface world where we live is just so fascinating to me. I also felt like this movie had a better musical score than Get Out, especially with the theme song, which is sort of a demented version of the song I Got 5 on It. I love that song and listen to both the original and movie versions on a pretty regular basis. So while Us doesn't quite measure up to Get Out, and is just a little sloppier with its execution, it still had plenty of strong elements for me to put it firmly on the great tier. Moving on now, we have the 2017 remake of a classic Stephen King story, It. While I have never read the book, and I also was very disappointed by the sequel. I was thoroughly impressed by this movie. I enjoyed that it followed a group of younger kids rather than the typical like late teen, early 20 age cast that horror movies usually have. Um, and I think the fact that they are young kids helps to sell the idea of Pennywise as a villain who preys on people's fears, because children are usually the most fearful of us all. I had a lot of fun with this movie, but it didn't really stick with me over time, so I think I'm going to place this one in the good tier. Up next is the 10th movie on this list, and the only foreign movie on the list, The Platform. This was a really interesting concept, which is also a clear allegory for class inequality, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. These people are brought into a facility that they don't really know anything about, and they end up being put in this structure which essentially works as a bunch of two-person jail cells stacked on top of each other. And the only food source comes from a platform which starts at the top and slowly moves down level by level, with the lower levels only being allowed to eat what's left behind by the people above them. And the story continues to evolve from there, but I won't spoil it any further than that. I just thought that this was a really interesting movie that had multiple scenes that put me on edge of my seat waiting for what was about to happen. And I'm going to put the Platform firmly on the good tier. Now that we're halfway through the list, I'm going to give a quick recap of what we've ranked so far. I have Ready or Not, Happy Death Day, It, and The Platform on the good tier. The Autopsy of Jane Doe, The Witch, and Us on the great tier. Alien, The Ritual, and Get Out on the amazing tier. And nothing in the best tier yet. Before we move into ranking the second half of this list, I would like to remind viewers who are watching this as two separate videos that I will be going over some spoilers for all of these movies. So if you haven't seen one of these movies and don't want it spoiled, then you can skip ahead to the next movie, which I'm going to try to set up as chapters to make that a little easier for you. But getting started with the second half of this list, we have another A24 horror movie, The Lighthouse. This is a wild and confusing movie that is absolutely carried by the incredible performances by Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. I think they arguably both give the best performance of their career here, and it's just a joy to watch. The story of two lighthouse workers who are completely alone on an isolated island is thoroughly weird and creepy as they slowly lose track of what's real and what isn't, and things only continue to escalate from there. The choice to make this movie black and white also definitely aided in creating that isolated and cold atmosphere that the director was going for. So I love this movie, and I would definitely put it on the great tier. Keeping with the A24 theme, we have their third and final appearance on this list with Hereditary. This is easily one of the movies on this list which scared me the most. It's also another movie which I thought had two incredible performances by Toni Collette and Alex Wolff. When this movie came out, I saw that it was getting a lot of praise, and that's really what convinced me to watch it, and I'm very glad that I did. I do think that this movie in particular works best if you go into it knowing as little as possible. So I'm not going to talk about the plot here very much, but this is absolutely an amazing movie that I would recommend to anyone who's a horror movie fan. It's also another movie that I'm going to put in the amazing tier very confidently. Moving on now into the 13th movie on this list, we have Escape Room. This is yet another one of those newer horror movies that I saw when it came out, and it far surpassed my expectations. This movie was clearly released as a way to try to capitalize on the popularity surge that escape rooms have had over the last 5 years or so. But along the way, they managed to make a genuinely entertaining movie that almost feels like a basic blueprint for the show Squid Game, which came out recently on Netflix, which is also an amazing show. If you haven't seen that, you should go watch that. But as the characters continue to move through more and more stages of this deadly escape room, the stakes are effectively raised, and we learn more about the people in the escape room and why they make the choices that they make. So while it isn't quite a top-notch horror movie, I would definitely put Escape Room in the good tier. And just as a reminder, even though the good tier is the bottom tier on this specific list, I still very much like all the movies in that tier. But there always has to be a bottom tier on one of these lists, and it just so happens to be the good tier for this list. And now we have The Invisible Man. I believe that this is the newest movie on this list, and it is also one that is carried by the acting of its main character, Cecilia, played by Elizabeth Moss. She does a great job as this woman who knows that what she's experiencing is real, but everyone around her just thinks that she's gone crazy. While it wasn't wholly original, and I thought it was done quite well, and I did enjoy watching. I thought that the sequence in the psychiatric hospital towards the end of the movie was particularly entertaining and thrilling. So while this wasn't a particularly standout horror movie for me, I would still put The Invisible Man strongly in the good tier. Up next, we have a movie that completely blew me away when I first watched it for the first time, Scream. This Wes Craven directed movie is part horror and also part comedy, and I think that made for a very fresh and entertaining horror movie. Throughout the movie, the characters make commentary and jokes about the tropes that horror movies are known for, and I think it also does a good job of not falling into those tropes unless it's for an intentional joke or a well-designed twist. I thought the acting was perfect for this style of movie, especially from Matthew Lillard, who was the standout for me. I enjoyed this movie from start to finish, and I will absolutely be putting Scream in the amazing tier, and this is another one that is a contender for that best tier at the end of the video. Now we have another movie that some people might not consider to be horror, but I certainly do, and that's Jaws. This movie essentially invented the summer blockbuster and is iconic for a number of reasons. The opening sequence of the girl swimming in the ocean at night and getting pulled under by the shark still scares me, and there are a handful of other scenes throughout the movie that capture a similar sense of fear from this menacing and brutal shark. Jaws also managed to rejuvenate the creature feature style of horror films, and I think it still holds up as the best of those type of movies to this day. And of course, the theme song that plays whenever the shark is coming in for an attack is iconic as well. So Jaws is definitely a movie that I'm going to put in the amazing tier. The next movie on this list is Don't Breathe. This is another movie which I watched specifically for this list because I had heard good things about it, and I have to say that I definitely enjoyed this movie. There were several scenes that evoked real tension and fear, so I think they pulled off the horror aspect quite well. I also really enjoyed the fact that essentially the whole movie takes place in one house, and every time you think that the main characters are going to find a way out, there's another twist that shows up to stop them, but none of those twists were bad or ruined the movie for me. I thought that the basement sequence, when they first discover the girl down there and then the lights get shut off, was the strongest section of the movie. There was one scene that was kind of gross, and if you've seen the movie, you'll know exactly what scene I'm talking about. But that scene aside, I definitely thought that this was a great horror movie, so I'm going to put it into the great tier. Up next, we have the classic Friday the 13th. This is one of the movies that I watched specifically for this list, and I'm glad that I did. It was easily the movie on this list that scared me the most while I was watching it. The fear didn't stick with me quite the same way it did from a movie like Hereditary, but in the moment, I was thoroughly freaked out. One of the directing choices that I thought was brilliant for this movie was there's several scenes where the way that the camera work is done, you can never tell whether the killer is actually walking up on someone or if it's just a slow zoom in shot. So I think that those type of shots really built the tension of never really knowing when someone was going to be attacked or when someone was about to die. And I thought that was really, really good directing. It's pretty easy to see why this movie became a classic. The jump scares are top notch, especially Kevin Bacon's death, and the music is, of course, iconic. And there are so many little plot points that got used over and over again in other movies that were taken from this movie. I do think that once you find out who the villain is, because in the original, Jason isn't the killer, it's actually his mom. So once you find that out, it kind of takes away a lot of the fear in the final act of the movie, suffers for that, but still easily a great horror movie, so I'm going to place this on the great tier. And now with the last two movies on this list, the only franchise with multiple movies, Halloween from 1978 and Halloween from 2018. The 1978 Halloween movie is another all-time classic, and for good reason. I think Michael Myers is easily the scariest of the big three horror villains between him, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger. I also thought that the plot was surprisingly tight and well crafted. In my opinion, I think the scariest element of this movie was the scenes in which you can hear Michael Myers breathing through the mask. Something about that just irked me. And the scene when Jamie Lee Curtis is hiding in the closet and Michael is breaking through the closet doors to come after her was also very tense and fearful. So between a great villain, a solid story, and a handful of really good scares, I think that the 1978 Halloween is a great movie, so I'm going to place it on the great tier. And the final movie on this list is the 2018 Halloween. As far as I'm aware, I believe that this is intended to be a 40-year later direct sequel to the original Halloween movie, which I think was a great decision. That meant that the writers and everyone involved with the movie didn't have to try to worry about the continuity of the other Halloween sequels, which most people agree aren't very good. There's a lot of similarities between this movie and the original plot-wise, but there are also some new creative elements added. This time when Michael Myers escapes, Jamie Lee Curtis is waiting for him, and she has trained her daughter so that they can defend themselves against him and try to kill him. Jamie Lee Curtis gives a great performance as this woman who is truly haunted by the events of the original film, and she tries desperately to get the people around her to believe her, and so that they can be prepared to save themselves. The graphics in this movie are also much more violent and more realistic than the original, which adds a lot in terms of gore horror. And I usually hate gore horror, but I think this movie has just enough of it to scare me but not disgust me. So while I don't think this movie quite captures the magic of the original, I would still put Halloween 2018 in the great tier. And here we are at the final part of this video where I'm going to order these movies within the tiers so that you can see my top 20 in order. At the bottom of the good tier, I'm going to put Happy Death Day, and then Ready or Not, followed by Escape Room and It, and then The Platform and The Invisible Man at the top of the good tier. Moving up to the great tier, I'm going to start with The Autopsy of Jane Doe, and then Don't Breathe, and then followed by Halloween 2018, and then The Witch, and then Halloween 1978, and then Friday the 13th, The Lighthouse, and Us at the top of the great tier. Then moving up into the amazing tier, I'm going to start with Jaws, and then The Ritual, and then Hereditary after that, followed by Alien. And then between Get Out and Scream, these are two very different horror movies, but I just had more fun with Scream, so I'm going to put Get Out in second, which means that in the best tier, we have Scream, my personal favorite horror movie. And there we have it, my 20 favorite horror movies ranked from 20th to 1st and within these tiers. And that brings us to the end of the video, so thank you for watching. Special thank you if you watched all the way through. As a reminder, I will be posting my spy movie ranking in a few days, and I will be trying to keep a schedule of 1 or 2 videos per week in the upcoming weeks. So turn on post notifications if you want to be one of the first people to see those videos. And thanks again for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like. If you think one of these movies should move up or down, let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if you have a different favorite, and I will respond to as many of the comments as I can. If you would like to see more videos about movies, please consider subscribing to stay up to date and to help my channel grow. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.